"Ma'am. Hey, you can't be back here." The voice came across the kennel apron flat and certain, the way a man talks when he has never once been wrong on his own ground. "Kennels are off limits to visitors. Go on now. Shoo." Staff Sergeant Garrett Pike was 29 years old, and he owned this stretch of fence the way a younger man owns his first truck. He stood with his thumbs hooked in his belt and his chin up, and behind him, 40 dogs lost their minds at the smell of a stranger. The woman at the chain link did not flinch. She did not flinch, and she did not leave, and she did not look at him. She looked at the dogs. She counted them the way some people count exits. Late June in South Texas, 4 o'clock, the heat coming up off the concrete in sheets, the whole run line roaring, and she stood inside that wall of noise as if it were weather. Heat. Bleach and straw and hot galvanized wire. The flat clang of 40 dogs throwing themselves at 40 gates. "You hear me?" Pike said. "I hear you." 2 words. She gave him exactly 2. He took it for slowness. He took everything that morning for the thing it looked like. A woman in plain clothes. Gray shirt, canvas pants, no badge, no lanyard, no reason. Standing at the perimeter of a working dog kennel like a tourist who had wandered off the visitor route. Lost spouse, lost adopter, lost something. He had a category for her before she'd said a word, and the category did not include the truth. What he did not see was the way she read the line. 3rd run from the end, a young Malinois was winding up, and she had already shifted her weight off that side before the dog hit the gate. She knew which one would break first because she had watched the ears, not the teeth. Her hand had dropped against her thigh, palm open, low, almost no motion in it at all. And the dog in the 3rd run came off the gate and sat, confused at itself, and she was already looking past it. Pike didn't catch any of that. He gestured toward the visitor lot. "Parking's that way. We've got a demonstration tomorrow. We can't have folks at the runs." She stepped back. 1 pace. No more. Her eyes kept moving down the line, sorting it the way you sort anything you've spent 20 years inside of. Run 7. A Dutch shepherd carrying its tail wrong. Sore hawk. 3 days old at least. Somebody had missed it. Run 12. A young dog that barked at the noise instead of at her. All show. No decision in it. Run 19. A serious animal that had locked on and gone quiet. And she clocked that one and gave it the small respect of not meeting its eyes. She read 40 dogs in the time it took Pike to decide she was a problem, and she filed every one of them, because that was the job she had carried in her body since before this staff sergeant could drive. "There a reason you keep looking at the dogs, and not at me?" Pike said. It wasn't quite a challenge. It was a man who was used to being the most interesting thing on his own apron. "Habit," she said. 40 feet away, at the open door of the equipment shed, Senior Master Sergeant Walt Mercer stopped what he was doing. Mercer was 51, and he had 30 years on the line, and exactly 1 talent left that he trusted completely, which was knowing what he was looking at. He was looking at a civilian who stood with her heels together without being told to. A civilian whose eyes never went to the handler's face, only to the dog's, tracking, sorting, the way you sort a room for the thing that's going to hurt you. A civilian who had just talked a green dog off a gate with a flat hand and no words. Civilians did not stand like that. He said nothing. 30 years had taught him when to say nothing. Down at the end of the line, in the last run, the oldest dog on the base had gone quiet. He was a sable Malinois, gray coming in hard around the muzzle, and while the whole kennel screamed at the stranger, he had pressed his chest to the wire and gone still, nose working, ears forward, not barking. The one dog in 40 that wasn't barking, and not one human being on that apron noticed except the woman, who did not turn her head, but whose hand dropped again, Low, open, the smallest thing in the world, before she let it fall still. "Appreciate it," Pike said, reading her stillness as compliance. "Have a good one." She turned and walked toward the visitor lot. Even strides. No backward glance. She did not look at the end run. She had decided, somewhere on the drive-in, that she would not look at the end run. And she was a person who kept the promises she made to herself. Behind her, in the last cage on the line, the base's hardest patrol dog stood with his nose against the fence and watched her go, and made a low sound in his chest that was not a bark and was not a whine, and that Pike, 10 feet away and certain of everything, never heard at all. Morning came at 0600 with a sky the color of clean steel, and by 07, the obedience yard was working. Senior Airman Casey Lund was 22 and 4 months onto the line, and he had a young dog at the end of his leash that he did not yet understand. The dog was green and fast and looking for a reason, and Lund gave it one. A half-second of slack, a glance away, a grip that said, "I am not sure," in the only language a dog reads. The dog spiked. It came off the ground and redlined, and hit the end of the leash, hauling 60 pounds of muscle, deciding all at once that the world was a fight. Lund's boots skidded. The cadre were 40 feet away across the yard, and 40 feet in a dog's world is a different country. "Heel! Heel!" Lund hauled back, which is the wrong answer, which is gasoline. At the fence, the woman from yesterday was already moving. She did not run. Running is another kind of gasoline. She dropped, low, side on, no square shoulders, no eye contact, turning herself from a threat into a question, and she made one sound, low in the throat, a single syllable that did not carry past 20 feet. The dog's ears came off Lund. They came off Lund and swung to her, and the animal hesitated. That whole roaring engine caught for half a breath on something it recognized as calm, and in that half breath, the red line dropped, and the dog's front end came down, and Lund got his slack back and his feet under him, and the dog, astonished at itself, sat. 9 seconds. From spike to sit, 9 seconds. Lund stared at the fence. "How did you—" "Lower," she said. "Slower." 2 words again, and a third for mercy. "You're fine." Pike came across the yard at a fast walk, drawn by the noise, and arrived in time to see a calm dog and a calm airman, and credited the only 2 people he expected to find. "Good recovery," he told Lund, and clapped his shoulder. And then he saw the woman at the fence, and his face did a thing that was not quite a scowl. More like a man finding the same fly in the same room twice. "Ma'am, you again." He blew out a breath. He was not cruel about it. That is the thing that has to be understood about Garrett Pike. He was never cruel. He was certain, which on a long enough timeline does more damage. "I appreciate the help, I do, but we've really got it handled, and you really can't be at this fence, okay? There's liability." "Okay," she said. She stepped back. 1 pace. Mercer had watched the whole 9 seconds from the equipment shed, and now he crossed the yard slow, the way you approach something you don't want to spook. He stopped at the fence beside her and looked out at the dogs instead of at her, which is how careful men talk. "Where'd you handle?" he said. "A beat. A round." He nodded, as if that were an answer. He had asked a question he already knew the shape of the answer to, the way you tap a wall to find the stud you can already feel. He looked at her hands. Working hands. A pale band of skin on the wrist where a watch usually sat. Turned inward, he'd bet. Face against the pulse. The way people wear them when they've spent years not wanting a glint to give them away. "Long time on the line, that red," he said. "The flat hand. The way you came off the 3rd run yesterday before it moved." She said nothing. Her eyes did not leave the dogs. "All right," Mercer said after a while. All right. And he walked back to his shed, and he did not stop thinking about it for the rest of the morning. He thought about the 9 seconds. He had been doing this 30 years, and he could have run those same 9 seconds, and maybe, gotten the same result. And he was the best the squadron had. The flat hand, the low syllable, the refusal to make eye contact, which is the single hardest instinct in the world to override when a 60-pound animal is trying to come apart at the end of your leash. You did not learn that at the schoolhouse. You learned that downrange, on real dogs, with real stakes, over years that left marks. She didn't even raise her voice, Lund said, half to himself. She just got low and said something, and the dog quit. Getting low's the easy part, Mercer said. It's getting low when every nerve you've got says stand up and pull. That's the part that takes a war or two. Lund caught up to him by the water cans. Who is that? Mercer watched the woman cross to the parking lot in her even, economical stride. 30 years, and he could count on one hand the people who'd made him unsure. I don't know yet, he said. But I'll tell you what, son. I'm going to find out. By lunch, she had a name, and it wasn't hers. The Fence Lady. The Dog Whisperer. It moved through the break room the way nicknames move through any tight crew. Not with malice, exactly, but with the lazy cruelty of people who are sure of their own ground and amused by anyone standing outside it. Somebody had seen her at the fence twice now. Somebody else made the obvious joke. It got a laugh, because it was easy, because she wasn't in the room. Pike set the tone without trying to. Probably wants to adopt one, he said, peeling the lid off his lunch. They always do. See a Malinois on the internet, decide they're dog people, walk right up to a working kennel like it's a petting zoo. He shook his head. Can't have it. These aren't pets. He believed that. That was the whole trouble with Garrett Pike. Every wrong thing he did that week, he did out of a true thing he believed. Out in the parking lot, the woman sat in a plain rental car with the windows down and took a call. And anyone close enough, and no one was, would have heard only her half of it and learned almost nothing. Copy, she said. 0700, Building 19. A pause. No reception. I'll find my own way in. Another pause, and something in her voice softened by exactly 1 degree. Understood. Thank you. She set the phone face down on the seat. She looked, for a long moment, at nothing. Inside, Pike finished his lunch and decided to do the responsible thing, which is how the worst of it always starts. He pulled up the visitor control log on the kennel terminal and made an entry. Unescorted individual, female, civilian attire, observed at kennel perimeter on 2 occasions, the 23rd and the 24th of June. Declined to state affiliation, advised to depart. Recommend perimeter awareness ahead of the 25th of June demonstration. He read it back. He was proud of it. It was squared away. It was exactly the kind of thing that got a young NCO noticed by the right people. He was not wrong to guard the line. A working kennel is a serious place, and an unknown person at the wire is a real thing to log. He was only wrong about who stood on the other side of the fence, and being right about the rule while being wrong about the person is its own special way to fail. He hit save. The entry went into the system, and the system, indifferent, carried it upward. 3 lines of careful prose, time-stamped, his name at the bottom. He felt good about it the way you feel good about a clean rifle. He had no way of knowing he had just written the first sentence of his own worst morning. Lund hung back after the others drifted out. He had not laughed at the nickname, and it sat wrong in him that the others had. She talked Reaper down in 9 seconds yesterday, he said. The green one. I couldn't, and she did it from outside the fence. Beginner's luck with dogs is a real thing, Pike said, not unkindly. Don't build a religion on it. But Lund had been 4 months on the line, and 4 months, is long enough to know that nothing about those 9 seconds had been luck. At the duty desk, Mercer pulled the next day's roster and the inbound personnel sheet, because something had been chewing at him since the fence. He ran his finger down the list of arrivals. He stopped on one line. He read it twice. He looked up, through the window, out toward the empty parking lot where a plain rental car was just pulling away. And he did not say the name out loud, because saying it would make it real, and he wanted to be sure. He read the line a third time. Then he set the sheet down very carefully, the way you set down something you've realized is loaded. Across the kennel, in the last run, the old sable dog had been off his food since yesterday afternoon. He stood at the corner of his run, where the fence met the walk, where she had passed, and he would not settle, and the night handler made a note about it and chalked it up to age. They had a name for her by lunch and a paper trail by sundown. Every category they put her in, they were sure of, and not one of them, not Pike, not the break room, not the system carrying his entry up the chain, had thought to ask the one question that would have undone all of it. If you have ever been written off by people who never once thought to ask, you already know how this story turns. Stay with Honor Tales and watch them find out. The paper became a small machine, the way paper does. By the second morning, the visitor control entry had done what such entries do. It had grown teeth it was never meant to have. When the woman in gray arrived at the kennel gate at 06:45, early again, her orders and her uniforms still drawn up in a bag she hadn't opened, because the official welcome was not until 7, a young defender met her at the turnstile holding a printout, and the printout had her described on it before she had said a single word. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to wait here. We've got a note about an unescorted individual at the perimeter, and I can't pass you without an escort." "Understood," she said, and she waited. She stepped into the thin band of shade by the gate shack, and she set her feet, heels together, hands folded behind her, weight even, and she waited the way a stone waits. She did not check the time. She did not sigh. She had stood longer than this and worse than this. She had stood 11 meters short of a culvert once for 40 seconds that lasted a year, waiting on a dog to tell her whether she was about to die. And after that, a gate shack in the Texas morning was nothing at all. She didn't even notice she'd come to parade rest. Her body did it without asking her. Pike arrived at 7-10, saw her behind the turnstile, and felt the small, clean satisfaction of a man whose paperwork has been vindicated. He came over. He was, again, not cruel. "Look, nothing personal," he said, and he meant it. "We just can't have randoms at the runs with the demo today. Brass coming in. You understand?" "I do," she said. She did. She understood something standing in that exact spot that he would not understand for another hour, and the gap between her. Oistupu. And his hearing of it was the whole story, if anyone had been able to read it. The note, meanwhile, had kept climbing. It had reached the squadron's morning read file, the single rolled-up summary that the commander skims before any event. And it sat there now, 3 lines of Pike's careful prose, in the same file Lieutenant Colonel Pearl Okafor would open, before walking out to host visiting leadership at the working dog demonstration. On paper, 1 hour before her own welcome, the incoming kennel master of the 341st Training Squadron was an unescorted stranger flagged at the wire. This is the quiet violence of a paper trail. It does not shout. It does not need to. It simply moves, line by line, desk to desk, attaching a description to a person and a suspicion to a description. And by the time it reaches someone with the authority to ask a real question, the question feels like it has already been answered. Nobody in that chain was cruel. Pike believed he was protecting his dogs. The defender believed he was following a note. The system believed it was being thorough. Every link in it was doing its job, and the sum of all that diligence was a chief master sergeant, standing in the shade of a gate shack, being treated like a trespasser. She could have ended it with one sentence. She could have said her name, her rank, her orders date, and watched the whole apparatus reverse itself in a panic. She didn't. She had her reasons, and the reasons were old, and they had 4 legs and a gray muzzle and 3 days left on the job. Mercer found her at the gate at 6:50. He had spent the night sure and the morning trying to unsure himself, and he had failed, because the inbound sheet said what it said. He'd gone back into the archived transfer file on the old Sable dog, the dog's whole paper life, kennel to kennel, the way the good NCOs keep it. And 3 documents deep, he'd found a line in a citation summary attached to the original handler's name. A line about a deployment in 2018. About a handler who had carried a wounded dog 400 meters under fire to an aid station and refused evac until the dog was stable. He'd read the handler's name. He'd read the inbound name. They were the same name. He didn't go to her. It wasn't his to say. He went looking for Pike instead, and he found him by the staging area, and he pulled him aside, and he kept his voice down. "That woman at the gate," Mercer said. "The visitor thing. Let it go today." Pike blinked. "Walt, she was at the wire 3 times. I logged it right. That's the job." "I'm not telling you that you logged it wrong." Mercer's jaw worked. "I'm telling you to walk it back before that demo starts. As a favor. Trust me on this one." But the demonstration was already being called to the training yard, and the dogs were already coming up the line, and the only man on the installation who knew exactly who the stranger at the wire was had no rank in that yard to stop what was about to happen. The training yard filled by 7:15. A short set of stands along the east fence, shade cloth snapping in the morning wind, and in the stands the visiting leadership, 2 colonels from the wing, a command chief, a civilian, or 2 from the program office. Lieutenant Colonel Pearl Okafor stood at the rail in her operational dress, 41 years old and 3 years into command, with her morning read file folded in her hand, and a line in it she had skimmed and not yet thought about. Down on the lane, the dogs were staging, and Garrett Pike had the best slot in the show. He had Argo. The old Sable dog was the showcase. 10 years old, going on 11, the most decorated patrol dog still working the squadron, weeks from a retirement nobody had announced to him. Pike stood at his head with the long line coiled in his hand and his chest out, and you could not blame him for the pride. He had built his whole standing on one true thing, and the true thing was this, that the dog answered to him. That when he gave the word, 80 pounds of trained certainty did exactly what he said. A handler is only as tall as his dog makes him, and Pike's dog was a legend. And so on that morning, Pike felt 10 feet tall. Mercer found Lund at the rail. "Whatever happens out here," he said quietly, "you watch the chief, not the dog. The woman." "What woman?" Mercer just nodded toward the edge of the yard, because that was the other thing the paper had done. The escort, not knowing what else to do with a flagged civilian during a closed event, had walked the woman in gray to the one place she could be controlled, the edge of the demonstration lane, behind a length of tape, where a defender could keep an eye on her. The system, blind and tidy, had placed her exactly where the show would run. She stood behind the tape with her hands folded, and she did not ask to leave. She was not watching the crowd. She was watching the old dog. She read him the way she had read the line 2 days running. The ear, the set of the weight, the old tells she had taught him, and the older ones he'd been born with. The way he carried his head a half-inch lower on the left now. The arthritis she could see from 40 feet, because she had spent 3 years learning every millimeter of how this animal moved. The slight hitch coming out of the sit that a stranger would miss, and that told her his hips hurt in the mornings. He was old. He was well. He was working. That was all she had come to see, and she had seen it. and she should have been able to leave with it. And something in her own breathing changed, slowed, went shallow and even, the way it does in the last seconds before a thing you cannot take back. Because the dog had lifted his nose, and the wind was coming down the yard from the stands toward the edge where she stood, which meant it was carrying her to him, every part of her, the way it had carried 40 kilograms of explosive to him through a foot of dirt on a morning 8 years gone. On the lane, Argo's head came around. It came off the front, off Pike, off the staged routine, and swung down the yard to the figure behind the tape at the edge. His nostrils worked. His whole body lengthened toward her. Pike felt it through the line. A current. A lean. And he corrected. A short, firm cue. And the dog held. Barely. The dog held because 10 years of discipline is a real thing. But the line had gone taut in a direction it had never gone before. And Pike, feeling only that his dog was distracted by some civilian, set his jaw and resolved to handle it. The dog knew something the handler did not. The dog had known it since the fence 2 days ago, when a hand he remembered dropped low and open against a gray pant leg and told his whole body a word he had not heard in 7 years. Easy. 10 years old, and 2,000 miles, and 7 years. From the last time they had worked a line together, the oldest patrol dog on the base felt the line tighten in his collar and began, quietly, to make a decision that no command on this earth had ever taught him. What happens next is the reason this channel exists. The slow, certain moment the truth stops being something she carries and becomes something the whole yard has to see. Subscribe to Honor Tales and stay with it to the end. Stop here. Go back. The yard can wait. The dog can wait, holding the line, for the length of one story the handlers don't know yet. Her name was Delia Vance, and she was 44 years old. And the night before all of this, she had sat on the edge of a bed in temporary lodging, with a folded set of dress blues laid out beside her that she had not yet put on, and a small framed photograph in her hands. She did not, as a rule, look back. You do not survive what she had survived by looking back. But the photograph was already in her hand, so for one night, she let herself. In the photograph, a younger woman knelt in the dust, dirt caked to the creases of her face, one arm around the neck of a sable Malinois, who was looking not at the camera, but up at her. The woman in the photograph was a master sergeant then, 36 years old, 11 years on the line. The dog was 2. They never tell you, she thought. In the only minutes of that whole week she let herself think in the first person, that the worst part is how good they are at their jobs. She remembered the road. Everyone who was there remembered the road. A dismounted patrol strung out along a culvert line at first light, and a young dog 2 years on the job who threw a change of behavior so small that 99 handlers out of 100 would have walked their people right over it. A hitch in his gait, a head that came down and to the left. Not a sit. Not yet. Just wrong. She had called the halt, 11 meters short of the second culvert slab. She had put her whole patrol on the ground, on the word of a 2-year-old dog and a feeling, and the engineers had come up, and under the second slab they had found 40 kilograms of homemade explosive wired to a pressure plate that 11 men were about to step on. 40 kilograms. The dog had smelled it through a foot of packed dirt and a sealed drum. The dog had smelled it and tried to tell her with his body, and she had been quiet enough to listen, and 11 men went home because of a flat-handed signal and an animal who trusted her enough to stop. That was the first time. The second time was 3 weeks later, and the second time cost. A compound on the edge of a town, and a contact that came from a doorway nobody had cleared, and Argo working out front where the work was. The dog took it first. She would not, ever, describe to anyone what that hour was, the weight of him, the heat of the day, the 400 meters of open ground between the compound and the aid station, and the things crossing that ground that wanted them both dead. She had a piece of metal in her own shoulder she would carry for the rest of her life. She didn't put him down. 31 kilograms of wounded dog, 400 meters, and she refused the litter and refused the evac, and walked him in herself and stood over the table until the surgeon told her he would live. They gave her a bronze star with a small bronze V on it for that. They gave her a Purple Heart for the shoulder. They could not give the dog anything because the regulations do not allow a medal on a dog's chest, which she had always thought was the single stupidest line in the entire body of military law. She remembered the surgeon, a young captain with blood to the elbows, telling her she had to sit down before she fell down. She remembered refusing. She remembered the exact weight of the dog in her arms, which she would have told you was the weight of every man on that culvert road 3 weeks earlier. 11 men plus 1 dog, all of them alive, all of them carried in one way or another by the same animal now bleeding on a field table. She had not sat down. She had stood at that table with a hole in her shoulder for 2 hours and 40 minutes until his breathing evened out, and the captain looked up and gave her one tired nod, and only then had her knees decided they were done. There is a thing that happens between a handler and a dog that has saved her life, and the manuals do not have a word for it, because the manuals are written by people who have never needed one. It is not love exactly, though it contains love. It is a debt that runs both directions at once and can never be paid, and that neither party would ever want to pay off, because paying it off would mean it was over. She owed him 11 men. He owed her 400 meters. Neither of them was ever going to mention it again, because dogs cannot talk, and she would not. She closed the photograph and set it face down on the blues. She had handed him off the year she made senior master sergeant, given him to a younger handler, the way you hand a child up to the next teacher, because moving up the line meant moving off it, and that was the price, and she had paid it without a word. She had not seen him in 7 years. He had gone where the program sent him, and the program, in its enormous and accidental mercy, had sent him here, to the squadron she was about to take command of. She had a plan for the morning. The plan was simple. She would arrive early, before anyone, and she would stand at the fence for 5 minutes and see that he was old and well and working, and she would not say his name, because his name in her mouth would tell him she was there, and she did not have the right to unsettle a working dog 3 days from the end of his service for the sake of her own heart. That had been the plan. Stand at the fence, say nothing. Let the old soldier finish in peace. The plan had not survived a handler named Pike, a sheet of visitor control paper, and a length of tape at the edge of a demonstration lane, which is where the dog could see her and smell her, and where, even now, he was deciding he had waited long enough. The demonstration began, and for the first 90 seconds, it was beautiful. Pike ran the routine clean. Heel, halt, the controlled bark and hold, the recall. Argo working like the legend he was, 10 years old and still crisp. And the stands made the soft, impressed sounds that stands make. Pike felt every one of those sounds land in his chest. This was his. This dog. This yard. This morning. And then he made the decision that ended the morning. And he made it, like all his decisions that week, for a reason he believed in. He saw the woman behind the tape at the edge of his lane. The fence lady. Here, now, at the wire of his demonstration, in front of the wing leadership, watching his dog with an attention he found. And this was the thing he could never have named. Proprietary. As if she had a claim. It nettled him. It embarrassed him. And a young NCO who is embarrassed in front of his colonels will reach for the nearest piece of authority he can find to make the embarrassment go away. He raised his voice for the stands. We've got an unauthorized visitor on the demonstration lane. Heads turned. Ma'am, I need you to step back and clear the area. This is a closed event. She did not move. At the rail, Lieutenant Colonel Okafor lifted one hand, pause, and looked, for the first time all morning, directly at the woman behind the tape. Something tugged at the back of her mind. A line in a read file. A name. Pike, certain he had leadership's attention and reading it as support, pressed. Ma'am, per visitor control entry. And he gave it. He actually gave the entry number aloud. The careful 3 lines he was so proud of, citing his own paperwork by its number in front of his commander, putting his judgment on the record in the clearest possible voice. He reached for the one piece of paper he was proudest of. He did not know he was signing it. Delia Vance stepped forward. Not back. Forward, to the edge of the lane, onto the line of the tape, and for the first time in 3 days, she lifted her eyes from the dogs and put them on Garrett Pike's face. And she smiled. It was a small smile, and there was nothing cruel in it. And it was the most frightening thing on that yard, though Pike did not have the equipment to know why. It was the smile of a person who has decided to let a man finish. Okay, she said. One word. And she went still again. On the lane, the old dog came off his stage point. He came off it hard. Not a break of nerve, not fear, nothing Pike had a correction for, because every correction Pike owned was built for a dog that wanted to do the wrong thing. This dog did not want to do the wrong thing. This dog had simply, after 7 years, found the right one. Pike hauled the long line on reflex, and the dog did not fight him. That was the terrible part, the part Pike would turn over in his head for the rest of his life. The dog did not fight the line. The line went slack because the dog had stopped pulling against it. He had started pulling towards something. And with 80 pounds of legend at the end of a slack line, and the whole yard going quiet around him, Garrett Pike turned to see where his dog had decided to go, and watched the base's hardest patrol dog put his back to his handler and start down the length of the demonstration lane, straight and certain and unhurried, toward the woman he had just ordered removed. Nobody called the yard to attention. That is the part they would all remember. That no order was given, that no one shouted, that the silence arrived on its own, the way silence arrives in a church. Argo crossed the lane. He crossed it at a working trot, head level, that old economy of motion he had never lost, past the stage cones and the staring stands, and his own handler standing slack-armed and open-mouthed. And he reached the woman behind the tape, and he did not jump, and he did not bark. He sat. He sat at her left side, in the heel, square and correct. And then he leaned, pressed the whole weight of his shoulder into her shin, the contact heel, the old broken protocol lean she had taught him in another country when he was 2 years old and frightened of the dark. And he let out a breath, one long breath, and was still. 80 pounds of trained aggression folded itself against her leg, like a question that had finally been answered. Her hand dropped, palm open, low, against the gray of her pant leg. The same signal from the fence, the same word in the only language that mattered. Easy. The dog settled into it, and Delia Vance, who had not cried in front of another human being in 20 years, did not cry now. She put her hand flat on the old dog's head, where the gray had come in, and she held it there. Walt Mercer was the first human being to move. He came off the rail, and he came to attention. Not the yard, not a formation. Just one old senior master sergeant straightening his back because his body would not let him do otherwise. And he said it, not loud, but into a silence so complete that every soul in the stands heard him. That's Chief Vance, a beat. She raised that dog. It moved through the handlers like cold water. Chief, the fence lady, the visitor. The flagged stranger at the wire was a Chief Master Sergeant, and not just any. That's Chief Vance, in the tone Mercer used, was a sentence with a whole history folded inside it, that the younger handlers only knew as a story they'd half heard. Because they had heard it. Of course they had. Every handler who came through the schoolhouse heard some version of it. The Master Sergeant who'd put 11 men on the ground on the word of a 2-year-old dog. The handler who'd carried 31 kilograms of wounded Malinois 400 meters under fire and walked into the aid station still on her feet with a hole in her shoulder. It was the kind of story the cadre told to explain what the bond was actually for, when a young airman thought it was about treats and tug toys. They had heard the story. None of them had ever connected it to a name. None of them had imagined the woman in the story would ever be a person standing in a gray shirt at their own fence, being told to shoo. And the dog in that story, the 2-year-old who smelled death through a foot of dirt, was the gray-muzzled animal now leaning against her shin in front of all of them. Lieutenant Colonel Okafor lowered her read file. The line in it had found its meaning at last. She stepped down from the rail and crossed the yard herself, and she stopped a respectful pace away, and she did not perform anything for the visiting brass. She simply spoke. "Chief Master Sergeant Vance." A short nod. "We weren't expecting you until 0700 tomorrow." "I came early," her hand still on the dog's head, her voice level, "to see an old partner." And there it was, said plainly. No theater, no shout, no call sign ringing off the buildings, just a woman stating who she was, while the proof of it leaned against her leg and breathed. Garrett Pike stood 20 feet away with a slack line in his hand and watched his face arrive, one expression at a time, at the truth. First the confusion, the visitor, the fence lady. Why was the colonel? None of it fitting. Then the disbelief, as the pieces refused, and then refused less. Then recognition, the worst moment, the one where the read file name he had skimmed and the inbound kennel master he'd heard was coming, and the woman he had shooed from the fence and flagged on paper and ordered off his lane, all collapsed into one single person standing in front of him with his own dog at her heel. And then, last, the horror. Quiet. Total. The floor going out from under a man. He had built his whole standing on one true thing. That the dog answered only to him. The dog had just told the entire yard otherwise. There were no handcuffs. No one was relieved on the spot. No investigation was announced. No career ended in the dust of that lane. There was only the silence, and the old dog leaning, and a young staff sergeant understanding, slowly, completely, that the woman he had spent 3 days dismissing would, at 0700 the next morning, be the one who signed his evaluations. There was a version of the next hour that everyone on that yard expected, and Delia Vance did not give it to them. She did not relieve Garrett Pike in front of the stands. She did not raise her voice once. When the demonstration was quietly stood down and the visitors filtered out talking in low tones about a thing they did not fully understand, she asked for one thing, that Staff Sergeant Pike meet her in the empty obedience yard. No audience. The exact opposite of how he had run his morning. He came expecting the end of his career. He stood at attention so rigid it looked painful. She let him stand for a moment. Then she did something he did not expect. She handed him the old dog's leash. "Walk him while we talk," she said. "He doesn't like standing still any more than you do." They walked the fence line, the woman and the staff sergeant and the gray-muzzled dog, and she spoke quietly, and she did not waste a single word. "You guarded the line," she said. "Somebody at that fence who wouldn't say who she was. Twice, ahead of an event, you logged it. That was right. I'd have logged it too." A pause. Then you decided who belonged on that line, without ever asking who she was. You were so sure of the rule you never checked the person. That's the part you got wrong. That's the only part. Pike's throat worked. Chief, I know, she said. I was the stranger at enough fences to know the difference between a bad handler and a good one pointed the wrong way. You're not a bad handler. Your dog's the best on this base, and that's not an accident. That's you, for 3 years. I'm not going to throw that away because you were rude to a woman in a gray shirt. It would have been easy to end him. She had every right and every reason in the world, and the watching crew half expected it, and a smaller person would have taken it, would have made the example, collected the apology, enjoyed the symmetry of it. If this is the kind of story you want more of, the kind where the quiet one had the power all along and chose what to do with it, subscribe to Honor Tales. The people who underestimate her never see the choice coming. She kept him on the line. Under her, which both of them understood, was the harder thing and the better thing. Young Casey Lund found his nerve by the water cans an hour later and asked her, straight out, if she would teach him the fence line read, the flat hand, the way she'd come off the 3rd run before it moved. And Delia Vance looked at the 22-year-old for a long moment and said yes, and said the first rule was the one a staff sergeant had just learned the hard way. Before you decide who's on the other side of the fence, ask. Pike was close enough to hear it. He heard it, and he gave a single nod to himself and owned it, which is the most you can ask of any man. The coda, when it came, was small, and it was hers, and there was no one watching but a dog. Late that evening, in the vet clinic office, she sat at a borrowed desk and signed the retirement paperwork for Military Working Dog Argo, 10 years and 2 months of faithful service, and at the bottom of the last page, she signed a second form, the adoption papers, because a retiring dog needs somewhere to go, and his somewhere had been decided a long time ago on a road 11 meters short of a culvert. No metal goes on a dog's chest. The regulations have never allowed it. But the service gives the good ones something better in the end. It gives them an old soldier to go home with. Argo lay under the borrowed desk while she signed, his chin on her boot, the way he had lain under 100 desks and tailgates and cot frames in another life. Every so often he opened one eye to confirm she was still there. 7 years he had worked for other good handlers, and they had been good to him, and he had done his job, because that is what the great ones do. But a dog does not forget the hand that taught him the dark was survivable. A dog files that away the way she filed away 40 runs of barking animals, and keeps it, and waits. She knelt to his level, the way she had in a photograph 8 years and a whole life ago, and from her jacket pocket she took a leash, worn soft, faded, the one she had carried in a footlocker through 7 years and 3 assignments, and had never once thrown away, and she clipped it to his collar. "Come on," she said. 2 words. "Let's go home." And the chief master sergeant and the retired war dog walked out of the kennels she now ran into the long gold Texas evening, and there was no memorial wall, and no message from a ghost, and no far-off harbor waiting in the dark. There was only a woman and a dog, and a leash she had refused to give up, going home together at last. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.